So we're now about, what, a week removed from this U.S. military invasion that was ordered up by Donald Trump, or that's what you were told. Actually, it was his corporate handlers, and to be really specific, Paul Singer, who ordered the U.S. military to invade Venezuela, a sovereign nation in the Western Hemisphere, to attack them and kidnap its president, Nicolas Maduro, and his wife, Celia Flores, and then drag them back into the United States and prop them up for a kangaroo court show trial in the Southern District of New York. And if you haven't figured this out yet, this is just only the beginning. Just today, the White House announced that it'll be strengthening its U.S. blockade in Venezuela, specifically to target Russian and Chinese ships that are operating without Kabbalistic permission slips. But instead of immediate additional bombings in Venezuela, according to Trump, the United States is about to set its sight on Mexico and blow some shit up there. Now, they haven't told us exactly what we're supposed to be attacking or where exactly in Mexico this is going to be taking place, but according to the sitting so-called president of the United States, we're going to war with Mexico. And we can only imagine that Americans soon will be going into Greenland and maybe into Canada, definitely Cuba and Colombia, and anywhere else that his handlers have in mind, so that these people that are calling the shots can turn a profit. And at the very same time, domestically, this country is on the verge of what looks like a modern-day civil war. There are politicians on both sides of the fake aisle right now ramping up the rhetoric. The talking heads on cable news are on TV around the clock, directly calling for American citizens to go into the streets and commit acts of violence against their fellow American citizens, to plunge this country into total chaos. And of course, when they do, when the country burns, the political donors and the politicians themselves and all of their elite little buddies, well, they can all just hop in their private jets and fly away to Israel. Kind of like when the ruling class of Cuba hopped on planes and flew into Florida as they left everyone else to die or live under the jackboot of communism. And if we reverse engineer everything that we're seeing right now and we look back to where things really started to fall apart, not just for the Trump administration, but really for the entire country, we land on the day that Charlie Kirk was killed. The assassination of Charlie Kirk ties into all of this. It's central to all of this in many ways. Even if we didn't realize it when he was alive, Charlie Kirk was the glue that was holding the entire so-called right wing of American politics together, and some of the opposition as well. It wasn't Donald Trump. It wasn't one of these MAGA figureheads. It wasn't some sort of a political operative occupying some power seat in D.C. No, it was Charlie Kirk, this 31-year-old young man who spent his entire adult life and much of his teenage life as well working around the clock to build a patriotic Christian political movement, which is kind of a novel concept. And that novel concept eventually got him killed. And we've talked on the Stu Peters show before about how Charlie Kirk was vehemently opposed to the United States striking Iran. He got shouted down by Trump over this. And behind the scenes, he was furious with just how much Israeli influence there really was in Washington, D.C. He was noticing, especially in the Trump White House. And sources inside of Turning Point USA have provided the Stu Peters Network with screenshots of messages that were sent among top-ranking brass at Turning Point that Charlie Kirk was on the verge of, quote, going ballistic over the Epstein cover-up. He was anti-war. He was anti-pedophile. And he figured out that apparently in order to be both of those things, you also have to be anti-Israel. Or at least you have to not be in bed with Israel. Which is probably why he turned down an offer of more than $150 million directly from Benjamin Netanyahu himself. Money which, by the way, has now conveniently been accepted by Turning Point USA leadership in the wake of Charlie's death. You know, all things considered here, it's not that difficult of an equation to solve. Charlie Kirk had the influence to steer an entire generation of young American citizens in a direction that really is America first, in the direction of taking care of our own people, taking care of our own country, securing our own borders, and not sending Americans to die all around the world for the sake of building some kind of a Zionist playground and making sure that political donors get as rich as possible. And speaking of political donors, just this week we talked about Paul Singer. Paul Singer is poised to make billions of dollars on the U.S. takeover of Venezuelan oil reserves because Paul Singer, a Jewish political donor closely tied to AIPAC, got a sweetheart deal in a courtroom that was presided over by an AIPAC judge, which gave him control of Citgo, the American arm of the Venezuelan oil industry. Do you remember when Charlie Kirk said that the Jewish political donors were destroying this country, that they were responsible for sending this country down the road of open borders and constant war and social upheaval? Well, he was talking about people just exactly like Paul Singer. And now that Charlie Kirk is out of the way, who is there among the mainstream Republican-adjacent political crowd to push back? Because everyone who was around Charlie, everyone who told him that they were on the same page that he was, lied to him. And they didn't just lie to him, they betrayed him. Some of them before his death, some of them after his death. But either way, they turned, and now they're digging their cleats in. It doesn't matter to them if they're under constant investigation or if the general public or the independent media don't believe them. They think that they can do whatever the hell they want, because up until this point, they've been allowed to do whatever the hell they want. But up until this point, the average Joe on the street hasn't been so plugged into what's going on in the world around him. He has more pressing personal things to worry about. But that was before the assassination of Charlie Kirk. It was a wake-up call for a lot of people. It was a moment of activism because people could see right through it. Charlie Kirk was killed, and then immediately a fake story was released claiming that he was shot by a mentally ill, trans-chasing weirdo called Tyler Robinson, who looks a whole lot like Lee Harvey Oswald, by the way. And then you have people like Erica Kirk and Tyler Boyer and Andrew Kovin and Jack Posobiec jumping in front of just about every camera that they could find, and not just to sell the official narrative, the fairy tale, but then also to start fundraising off the back of their dead so-called friend. And even worse, their dead so-called husband. It's disgusting. But sadly, they're not alone in all of this. Just go open up Rumble or X or YouTube, and every single time you're going to see a certain individual going out of his way to sell the official Charlie Kirk death narrative and to endear Charlie Kirk to the GOP establishment and to demonize anyone and everyone who's asking questions about what really happened at UVU on 9/10. And of course, in the days leading up to 9/10 at Fort Huachuca. And that's Tim Pool. Tim is what we could probably just call the star of the show in this situation. He's on air just about every day blasting Candace Owens for seeking the truth about the death of her friend. He's going berserk, complaining that Candace Owens' life isn't under as much danger as he thinks that it should be, and doing everything that he can to sell the narrative that Charlie Kirk was taken out by a crazed left-winger. And just today, I flipped on the TV and I pulled up the Rumble app, and Tim Pool, of course, was at the very top, once again, ranting about Candace Owens and Nick Fuentes, and people who just won't fall in line behind this monstrosity of a government, and even J.D. Vance's 2028 presidential ambitions. Watch.
Political lawfare was then waged, trying to stop Trump. He was, again, accused of being a Russian asset. He was impeached. We spent millions of dollars doing it, all of which turned out to be silly. He never had hookers pee on a bed. All just utter nonsense. So eventually you get the 2020 election, and he does lose for whatever reason you think he lost. But then something happened. Joe Biden was massively unpopular. His presidency was miserable. The Afghanistan withdrawal was the turning point in which his popularity collapsed. And it's very difficult to maintain Democratic enthusiasm going into 2024 when Trump gets to point the finger and say, I was the right choice. And so what happens? Thanks to the work of Charlie Kirk, Donald Trump wins. And I believe almost entirely Charlie Kirk. Of course, there were many efforts by people like Scott Presler. Elon Musk funded a lot of this. But Charlie Kirk's $160 million organization went to high schools and colleges and got a generation of young men to shift rightwards and create these trends. How do you stop an emergent phenomenon? Well, there's a couple ways you do it. First, Charlie's got to go. You cannot have this leadership that is guiding a generation. So he's dead. Whoever did it, whatever it may be, maybe it's progressives. That's what the FBI is claiming. Maybe it's deep
there's
state.
a brainwashed generation like this kid who killed him.
The point is, presumably the kid, it's Robinson who killed him. Either it's left-aligned advocates who are like, he's making Trump win, it must be stopped, or the deep state, whatever you believe. Charlie being gone is a major advantage to those who never wanted Trump to win in the first place. The next thing we see is the overt demonization of everything he built. Turning Point was one of the most powerful organizations making young people vote right wing. And those young people are entering their 30s. Gen Z is now about to be 30 years old. They're trying to buy houses, and they are leaning rightward. So Charlie Kirk gets eliminated. Then you need to eliminate Turning Point. Well, what do we do? Candace Owens starts chasing the narrative. Turning Point intentionally killed Charlie Kirk, or at least knew about it. So if you are an elite establishment, liberal world order guy, you say she needs to be the most prominent individual for conservatives. Put her on the front page of YouTube.
Nick Fuentes.
Nick Fuentes is banned, but they have on Instagram blasted him out like crazy. And so the presumption now is, based on what we're seeing, if I was intelligence and wanted to make sure JD Vance does not win, well, you've got Nick, who hates JD Vance, and you've got Candace, who also hates JD Vance. But Candace is accusing JD Vance of weird things that are off-putting to a suburban middle-aged woman. YouTube puts her on the front page and makes sure that new users on air-gapped machines are going to get her show, and she gets 120,000 concurrent viewers, making her the biggest live stream in the country. You now are creating the Pied Piper, who's going to lead conservatives, either through a desire for money, clicks, or because they believe her, into sounding like retards. We call this the retard right. Because if you want to win for your worldview, going to a person walking down the street and asking them if they believe that Erica Kirk is a literal machine built by the deep state as an actual robot to control the minds of people, and that Turning Point has betrayed Charlie's behind it, and the Zionists invaded Venezuela, they're going to look at you like you are fucking retarded.
Well, he's right about one thing. Charlie Kirk was commanding an army of Zoomers, notably an army of Zoomers that's incredibly important to the GOP. And not just the GOP, but to the broader military-industrial complex, because you can't lose sight of the fact that for many, many years, TPUSA was the propaganda arm, the mouthpiece, closely tied to, directly connected to the war-loving pro-Israel right. But as soon as Charlie started getting wise to what was really going on, he ended up dead. Just think about this. Charlie Kirk had millions of Zoomers hanging on his every word. If he told them to turn on Israel, they would have. If he told them to turn on the idea of sending Americans to go die in far-off corners of the world in wars that we have no interest in fighting, they would have. But now Charlie is dead, and Turning Point USA is establishing chapters at high schools all over the country, so that as soon as these kids walk out of their Turning Point meetings, they can go straight over to the Army recruiting table and get the ball rolling. So that they can go fight in these wars that are being initiated by the very same Jewish donor class that Charlie Kirk was trying to warn them all about in the final days of his life. And in the middle of all of this, you have Tim Pool and others who have very obviously been sent in to try to prop up the very same Israel First political machine that Charlie refused to be a part of any longer. And by the way, did you hear the part there where Tim said that JD Vance is running for president in 2028 and he's being opposed by the intel community? In what universe is that true? JD Vance is the intel community. This is Vice President Palantir that we're talking about here. Not just Vice President Palantir, but Vice President Body Snatcher. This is the guy who took Charlie's body and put it on Air Force Two and got it the hell out of Utah before an autopsy could ever be performed. I mean, he looks just as guilty in all of this as Erica Kirk does, who, by the way, incidentally, may be his 2028 vice presidential running mate. You heard it here first. There is a reason why people like Candace Owens and Nick Fuentes and, frankly, millions and millions of people don't like this guy, because he's just another cutout. He's a fake. He's an actor. He's a guy who's going to do what he's told, just like Tim Pool, but with some real power attached to it. And while Tim was going down this road of attacking and demonizing anyone who won't support his FBI narrative or his love for JD Vance, he also made it a point of saying that if you want to win elections, if you want to put together a serious political movement, you have to love Israel. Really? People aren't going to form a political movement around opposing the Zionist occupation of this country and its government? Yeah, sorry, bro. That's already happening. People all over the country are searching high and low for candidates who are not owned by Israel. We're witnessing the rapid rise of AZAPAC. Every single time a member of Congress posts on social media, somebody or multiple people are in the replies posting screenshots of their AIPAC donations. What Tim Pool and his beanie are doing here is gaslighting at its finest. But it's not going to work anymore. It's all so plain to see. Nearly every single thing that's playing out in this country right now, from our march to war to the AI takeover to chaos in the streets of our own cities, all of it truly was set into motion immediately after the death of Charlie Kirk. It really was a turning point. And now there's no going back.